Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for your patience. We are just working out some technical issues, and we want to welcome this great team. They're going to share a lot of great information with us, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. I just want to let you know that if you make sure to take note of your questions, those of you that are on joining us virtually, please make sure to send us your questions through the chat or through Q&A, and they will be answering questions. And also at the end, make sure to fill in the feedback. It's important for us to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Good morning. How's everyone doing today? So my name is Adam Stowe. I'm with UCSF, and I'm the RAY team lead. So RAY stands for Research Analysis Environment, and we provide a virtual environment for compute and for storage for our researchers. It's IS3 compliant and NIST 800-171 compliant as well. So we're going to switch it up a little bit because we're having some technical difficulties, but what we'd like to do is you're all here. So we're excited that you're here, and we'd like to know specifically what it is that you're looking to get from the presentation. So as we present, we can maybe emphasize the parts that you're interested in hearing about. So if I could have anyone let us know what you're here, what you want to know about our process, and then we will actually walk through the process and explain more about those specifics as well. That's fair. Then we could go ahead and we could just get started. And as we get warmed up, we can do that. So Maggie, did you want to tee us up and set the conversation?
All right. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So I'm Maggie Beers. I'm at UCSF. I'm the Associate CIO for Education, and it's a brand new role. Well, it's 1 year old now that I've been there. And the idea is to oversee the education mission. I have a counterpart person who oversees the research mission, where Remy and Adam are in. And what has been, this has been a year of discovery in terms of looking at our processes and coming at these different organizational ideas from more of an academic perspective, and looking at evidence-based practice and research, and really just putting our practices on the table and taking a critical eye to see, like, why are we doing this? Is this what we should be doing? And so I did my PhD in computer science and teacher education and culture anthropology at University of British Columbia. My advisor, Ricky Goldman, studied under Seymour Papert. Do any of you know Seymour Papert from MIT? He did the Lego models with kids in the inner city. So he developed the constructionist methodology of teaching, which is something that I really embrace. And it comes from the constructivism framework. But constructionism is the basic idea is it's a teaching methodology where the idea is that people are more engaged when working together on personally meaningful objects that they can then share with others. And so those are called objects to think with. And so that's what this presentation is really. We're going to be presenting a technology, which is a process basically. We're just using it as an object to think with, because what an object to think with does is that it makes explicit the implicit knowledge and understanding. And so by making this explicit and sharing it and having some sort of a connection, that's where you can really get to know what the biases are, what the assumptions. And so creating an online course is the same. It's an object to think with. And so this is a technology piece. And so I really welcome Remy and Adam for being so open, because they invited me to present with them. And I said, okay, well, you know that I'm going to have some critiques, and they're like, bring it on. So that's what we're going to do today. All right. So here you go.
Thank you. I don't know if we've got the PowerPoint up yet. I want to note that the technical difficulties this morning are me not getting the slide deck done in time. So this has nothing to do. This is not at all a conference problem. This is absolutely a Remy problem. And those of you in the room who know me will not be surprised about me working on the slide deck up until the moment of presentation. I've been known to be editing slide decks behind people while they're talking. which is actually true. So my name is Remy Frazier. I work at UCSF in the research division under Maggie's counterpart, Mandy Terrell. I run principally the REDCap teams, which may mean something to some people. It may not mean things to other people. It's a research data capture platform. We work a lot with researchers thinking how to solution platforms, how to solution their problems and get them. We usually sort of think about building systems that are sort of prototype quality that need to survive the length of a grant or the research project, but they don't need to be like production quality because they only need to survive the length of the research program. And like sometimes those grow up and go off to be big, like full platforms that become their own technologies. A lot of times they don't because they like needed to serve 30 research study participants. And so it was in sort of that lens that I approached the work that we are going to talk about. And I actually can talk without the slides, but I want to make sure that the folks online have them. So I don't know, we're almost there. Amazing. Okay. So then I can already, some of the lead up pieces I can say is I really appreciate Maggie and Brian, the two of you joining us on this. I'm much more interested in what you have to say than what I have to say, which again, those of you at UCSF who have heard me talk before will be surprised to hear. I'm really delighted to be here at UCB at Berkeley on the historical land of the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people. This work has been really close to my heart, even though I am a white cis het man. It's hard for me to know what the right ways were to approach some of the work we're going to talk about today. But as Maggie pointed out, my objects to think with are building systems and building platforms. So this was, I think, a lot of this that we'll talk about today is that I'll talk about today was sort of my processing of a lot of the DEI efforts at UCSF. And so you will see, we're not going to show wireframes. We're not going to show you the web forms, the tools that we actually built. We're going to talk through the process changes that we did, because that to us is the more interesting piece. We can do demos. We can even pull the system up at some point if people want to see what we put together at UCSF. I don't think that's the interesting part of today, though. I think the feedback and cycling with Maggie is going to be the interesting part. While we wait, Adam, I'm out of vamping. Do you have anything else?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm here because I had the privilege of undergoing the hiring process when I first started 2 years ago, and then I got to be part of the process and manage it in my hiring as well. And so I got to see both sides of the coin. I'll tell you what I initially liked about the process. I am a slower processor unless something's on fire. So if something's on fire, I'm like, you got to take care of it. But usually I like to have the time to process, because even though I work in IT, I'm not necessarily the most detail-oriented person the first time around. So, I might miss some things and I got to come back and check it again. And so part of the process was there was a self-assessment that we had to do to just kind of gauge where you are with different pieces of technology. And I spent probably the first 4 hours thinking about how I was going to start answering these questions before I answered the questions. And so part of the process involved sending me a skills assessment that gave me time to fill it out. So it wasn't in the interview, fill this out now, and then we're going to bombard you with questions about it. It gave me time to process and think and consider how I was going to not just present myself, but also answer questions about how I rated myself. And I wanted to be consistent with my answers. And so I needed to develop a mental strategy for it. So I really appreciated that. It gave me that chance. And also when I was hiring, that same process also allowed us as a team and a panel when we were interviewing to gear our questions towards the same types of questions that they get into the same types of information, so that our different candidates were getting the same types of questions to keep the process equitable as well. Because what you don't want to do is you diverge into, oh, we learned all this rabbit trail about this person and we never gave another candidate the same opportunity to explain or add context on their skills as well. So it gave us a common framework. The other thing that we learned through the process was we had a conversation about what we were looking for in terms of answers for these skills assessment questions. And so it was, I don't want to call it quite a tight rubric, but a guide that said we needed to know this and we kind of want to see this. And we had that conversation as a group so that when we asked those questions and candidates gave answers, we were all, what we thought, on the same page about the answers that we were looking for. And then interestingly enough, once we finished and we looked at the responses and how we graded, we put those in first. So they were set before we had our conversations. And then when we start talking about how we graded what we graded, interestingly enough, we realized that even though we had this guide and we thought we were relatively close with what we were looking for, how we graded, there was some more variance than we expected as well. And so we got to have that conversation as well. But well, wait a minute. I thought when we said this, we were looking for this specifically. And the other person said, well, actually, we're looking at this too. So it created the conversation that we can have. But those were some of the gaps that we identified by going through the process that we didn't even realize that we had a gap because, we're all thinking, oh, we're on a panel, we're talking to each other, and when I say something, you understand exactly what I'm thinking because I always say exactly what I'm thinking to you, right? So that was one part in my experience on being both sides that benefited us.
I don't think so. This mic's a little bit hot if you can pull it out. I think we'll proceed. We're gonna make this a chalk talk while we wait. And if we get some slides up, we'll get some slides up, but otherwise we can move ahead. My partner, when she defended her PhD, did a chalk talk instead of a slide talk. That was very successful. I've always wanted to be able to tell her I did the same thing. So today's the day. Okay, so I'm gonna be holding a laptop when we go so I can keep track of my own pacing. Adam.
Oh.
Yeah. There you go.
Now I'm important.
Okay, so thank you, Adam. Okay, so I'm going to try to speed through a top level summary of this platform that we built to try to control our hiring processes a little bit. I don't know what UCs we have represented here. At least at UCSF, there's sort of this handshake that happens between when HR develops a candidate pool for you and when the hiring manager or the hiring team gets them. And for us, at least at one point during early COVID, when we started sort of the first hiring flows we were able to in the COVID era, that handshake was sort of like more like kicking the football over the fence and hoping it landed somewhere. So we realized we didn't have a lot of control around either the normal parts of the hiring process or a lot of the DEI anti-racist kinds of activities we were being trained to think about at UCSF at that time. And so we sort of sat down and thought about how can we control this process? And I'm going to talk about the controls I thought through and that our team thought through to try to control the hiring process after HR passed it to us. And then after that, Maggie's I keep asking her to give us criticism on this, but she's gonna talk about some of the broader framing and some of the lensing that we could have used or that could be used for this kind of action in the future. So the first version of the system that we built was in 2021. We leveraged our REDCap system to build it on top of, which let us prototype really quickly a set of web forms, a set of surveys, scale-based scoring, emails, and things like that for us to communicate with our potential hires or our potential candidates, as well as our hiring team or our panels. We deployed it initially in mid-2021, and then we used it for 4 different hiring flows through, I think, maybe March of this last year was our last one. And with each pass, we've iterated through it and taken lessons learned and sort of rebuilt the platform each time as we've gone through it. I think we've gone through 85 candidates using this sort of controlled flow. And we've done 7 hires, I think, Adam, but I lost track of, it might be 8 at this point. And I will say there is a talk Sandy Stahl is doing later that I aspirationally wish could be a companion piece to this, but hers may be in some ways more interesting because she has a lot of quantitative data around this. I'm going to be speaking qualitatively on pieces. So she's got a lot of hard data around the UCSF leadership development program and sort of similar kinds of control activities. One of the things we discovered maybe on round 4 was that in addition to having a platform that gave us sort of a controlled flow, both in terms of how we communicate to people, how we have them talk back to us, and how our interviewers behave. We also accidentally built a long-term data storage for all of our scoring for people. So we can now follow UCSF retention rules and say for up to 4 years from now, we can say, this is why we picked this person and here's the quantitative reason why, which we've since discovered for a variety of reasons is a really good thing to have around.
Can you tell me which?
So I'm going to talk about sort of what I think of as that process of kicking the football over the fence and hoping somebody picks it up between recruitment and the actual hiring process. sort of the conceptual framework I started with when I started to look at how I would sort of take that workflow or that process, that business process apart and reconstruct it a little bit was, in our experience, sort of what we see in a hiring practice is a position gets created, a job description is written and approved, the job gets posted online. Then there's a recruitment process that's like relatively opaque to the hiring manager. And then at some point there's resume and CV intake, which at UCSF happens on brass ring. I don't know actually how other UCs do it. And then at that point, the recruiter at UCSF at least filters the resumes and the CVs and decides what can get passed down to the hiring manager. And sort of then at that point, we pick up the process. And I wrote on here this sort of pithy, after that point, the hiring manager does stuff. Yeah. Because we, at least as I came up as a team lead and a manager at UCSF, we didn't have any formal training in like, this is how you approach a hiring process. And I know UCSF is doing an amazing job starting to build that process out. And I'm looking at UCon because I know that part of that is you. But at the time we started this, that didn't exist. And so then sort of after the hiring manager does whatever this sort of opaque box is, then a finalist gets selected and an offer is extended. And so I sort of broke that process into sort of a 5-stage process of ideation, sort of broadcasting, which is the recruitment and intake process, a screening process, an interview process, and then a selection process. And then working from that conceptual framework as like, okay, this is our standard generalized hiring practices. We started to look at how we would target interventions to improve that process and make it either a little bit more controlled or a little bit more fair. So we, at least in general, have a hard time changing big institutional level processes. In my mind, one of UC's greatest strengths is its size, but it's also one of our biggest weaknesses. So we had to look at where we could introduce controls or flows inside that larger hiring process to sort of tune them where we could, but acknowledging that we can't try to go fix the big institutional process. So like partly because it's hard, but also like there be dragons. Like if you start to get that movement happening, like do we as a team want to actually force those conversations to happen? Because like there's bigger institutional movement that probably needs to happen than what we can affect. Hey, there we are. If that's movable, can you jump to slide 9? And if it's not, that's okay. Okay, so looking at those sort of five phases of a hiring practice, ideate, broadcast, screen, interview, and select. Only a couple of those are things that we as like the hiring manager or the hiring department can really fine tune. And so what we sort of decided was we can tune the ideation process because we're the ones saying what the job is that needs to happen. We can't really tune the broadcasting process. Like we can push postings out to our network, but we discovered it's hard to get the institution to like buy licenses or buy subscriptions to equity-based job boards and things like that. That's a weirdly hard thing to do. I think it's less hard now, but like we couldn't get that traction. It's hard for us to control the HR screening process. They have a very clear institutional process they follow based on the job recs, the job postings, the actual CV people get. So we can't fix those processes, but we can fix the interview process, or if we not fix it, we can at least tune it. And we can fix our selection process and try to remove some of our own biases from it. I'm going to pause for just a second because we're just going to get to the point where it'd be helpful to see. Keep vamping. Okay, great. So you're about to see a bunch of very text-heavy slides, which is relatively unlike me. But I tried to get sort of a before and after snapshot of what the processes that we were following looked like. So starting with sort of this ideation phase, sort of our experience, which is like kind of oral tradition, which is interesting how oral tradition some of these hiring processes are and maybe shouldn't be. So our ideation process, we sort of, you create a position, you write a job description, and then you go through like the HR review approval process. And that's in general, like the big institutional pieces of that are hard to change. But what we could do is start to put some checkpoints in that process for ourselves to make sure we as a team building a JD actually sit down and say, like, do we care about an education requirement? Is it a requirement or a preference? Do we care about requirement for education, or should it be education or years of experience? Maggie's going to bring up some really good points about, is that at all the right way to think about things, sort of quantifiably? Oh, brilliant. Thank you. It takes a village. Could we get a quick round of applause for the tech team and the conference team? Thank you so much. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you. Adam has informed me that we have 15 minutes left, so I am going to go fast. Maggie, can you get us to slide 11 on there? Okay, great. And I'm going to put this down, and then I think I can advance. And this really can be quick. Okay, so improving the interviewing process. Before, the resume goes to the hiring manager does something that's opaque. We broke that into sort of 4 phases. There was a content development phase that we went through with the hiring manager before the job even gets posted. We built out, and Adam talked about this, a pre-interview self-screen for skills assessments. That was really interesting because that was our first moment as a team to talk back to candidates. So we could communicate a lot about UC values just by how we ask them questions, what the questions are that we ask. Like a lot of institutions at that point, we're not even asking pronouns. Like things like that, we could communicate in that moment in like early 2021 that like UC cares about these things, and we got feedback from candidates that some of the questions we asked there informed their decision to either come to the interviews or accept positions. We prescribed the process to have an initial interview that was pretty controlled with the hiring manager, followed by a panel interview, and then sort of a tiebreaker case study interview. We did not get to the point that we were anonymizing names in like education. That's a really hard process. Sandy will talk about that later if you go to her session. I talked about the content development process a little bit. We put a lot of emphasis on building rubrics and like target scores, threshold scores for people to pass different phases of the process, with the idea being that we could take out some of our own biases by doing that. We also tried to have an outside process custodian, and then throughout the interview process, we tried to have outside reviewers from other departments. John Johnson, who's here, served as that reviewer for us for a few of the phases, to try to make sure that we weren't imposing too much of our local cultural bias on our hires. Scales, rubrics. At phases, we tried to focus on minimum viable skills rather than culture fits, and then shift more towards the culture fit and soft skills things to later in the process. I want to make sure Maggie gets plenty of time and Brian gets plenty of time. So, okay, great, we're done.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to just take a moment to talk about education and how humility is so important in education, and the fact that we started yesterday meeting together to talk about more about this, and it just started out with just a whole like vulnerable moment of us talking about all the personal things that we're personally going through and our families are going through, and it's nothing is ever perfect. And I don't know if I've ever been to a tech conference specifically where actually audiovisual works the right time, and it feels like there's some ghost of some old audiovisual analog person out there that's just like messing with us. But I want to hand this over to Brian, and I'm just going to set the stage with talking about the teaser that everyone keeps talking about of the criticism, but it sets up Brian's piece. And it's about certain assumptions that sort of came to my mind when I was hearing the discussion about, oh, we've got a process, we have a technology, we have web forms, we've got it all like rubrics and quantitative and qualitative. And I thought, there's some assumptions here that I would want to unpack as an educator. And so these are what they are. And the first assumption is that technology is neutral. And I think we all know that it's not neutral. It always has an implicit bias. The first, that bias can be mitigated, that we can somehow work around our bias. And I think that we just need to confront it and own it. That equality and equal systems equals equity, but that's not the way the world works. Like some equity means you get what you need and everybody has the opportunities that they need, or that if they haven't had those, that you consider them. And then that DEIAR can be automated. And really, it's not easy. You got to do the work. You can't skip over any phases. It really begins with yourself, which is what those vulnerable moments were. And I think that's why we had our whole technical thing here. It's like, you know, we're people, we're messy people, and things aren't easy. And so we have to, so a prescribed protocol is not necessarily going to bring you the results that you need. So with that, I'll pass this over to Brian, who I've hired in 2 institutions in 2 different jobs. And he's great. He's great. All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Morning, everyone. It's still kind of early, so like, you know, I'm gonna be still processing everything. And I'll keep it very high level. I'll kind of like zoom out a little bit, but this part of like technology being neutral, right? Like if you have a set of, you know, technology, a product, whatever, if you have it, that means everything is cool and we can move on, but that's not really it. And so my role in Maggie's team is I'm a UX designer. And in specific, I'm looking at inclusive design, right? So show of hands, who kind of knows what UX design is? I mean, there's different definitions, so that's why I'm asking. Yeah, cool. And within UX design, there is also this thing that is more, it's becoming more mainstream, but hasn't always been, which is inclusive design, right? Is that we use a human-centered design approach to create a product or service that enables people from different backgrounds and is actually usable for them. And so there's this iterative process, right? Ideation, like, you know, who do you actually bring to the table to bring up ideas? Who do you interview in your research? And, you know, all these different things. I'm trying to keep it very high level because I want to get into the Q&A. But with the inclusive design, I think when you're faced with a problem and you're trying to solve it and you get into this process, it's always great to just stop and ask yourself, wait, am I actually excluding someone? Am I not hearing someone's voices, right? Like we can have all great intentions. Let's just say, for example, us 4 are going to solve this next big problem. And it's just going to be us 4, and we're going to iterate the process. We're going to come up with an idea. We're going to research. And then based on the user data that we get, we'll find a solution, or we'll wireframe it, prototype it. That's great. But did we actually exclude someone from that process? And what I mean by that is, yes, UX design is about empathy. It is about hearing people's voices. But I think it's not enough to just interview them, get their input, design something, then test it with them and say like, well, can I get your quote unquote stamp of approval? Does this actually work for you, right? When I talk about inclusive design, it's more like bring those people in earlier in the process, right? If you're already going out of your way to interview them or get their feedback, why not bring them into quote unquote a brainstorming session, right? Hey, what do you think is a good solution for this? What can you bring to the table? And if we do that, I think you'll get just a much fresher breath of ideas into that, right? Because yes, I have my background, but there's so many different things that I will not consider. And that's the truth of it, right? So it's also about knowing your own positionality within the context that you work in. And when we talk about inclusive design, that's what it really is. It's really centering the people that you're trying to solve a problem with. And how does that centering look like? It's not just, you know, getting that stamp of approval. And I keep saying stamp of approval because that is frequent. That always happens, right? It's like, I don't know, like, hey, Brian, like you're a diverse person, right? You're Black. Can you like tell me if this is all right? Like, nah, that doesn't work. Like, that's not cool, right? Like what would be better if that person came up to me and said like, hey, we're working on this project. Can I actually get your input? What do you think about that? And then I'll bring my own creativity to it. And then you can apply that more broadly, right? We have universal design principles where it's like you're finding a solution that actually works for everyone. And there doesn't need to be any kind of adaptation or anything else, because that in itself is sort of excluding people. If you have 2 versions of a product, right? You just kind of reinforcing the status quo. And so, yeah, that's just really my setup. Kept it very broad, but I have other notes. And so if you're all interested, you know, I can share those with you.
Yes. So it's been really great. I first started working with Brian right before, right when COVID hit. And so we've been through a lot of Zooms over the last few years. And it's incredible when you go through something like that together. I just want to give some alternatives to because I said, I had these assumptions, but I want to also offer some hope and some alternatives. And yes, all of that is really a valuable process. And I'm not saying that it's not a bad process. It's a part of a process, and also this. So it's about adding on the things. So the idea that technology is never neutral, the remote proctoring systems, for example, I'm very happy now at UCSF, we no longer have any schools using remote proctoring. But if any of you were following the news on that, we know that it was created by white men, and people that are neurodiverse or people of color, people who don't have a quiet place to be. All of those folks are tagged as suspicious of cheating. And so what it does is this is an example of non-neutral technology that was sort of adopted without much thinking by administrators, and it ends up reinforcing those oppressive surveillance type situations. The other one is that in terms of bias, it's a human condition. It's part of our survival. We have to make some sorts of assumptions about people, but we have to take that time to start with ourselves. So in this interviewing process, one thing that struck me was it's focused on the other and the candidate and the other groups of people. And what we really also need to think about is take some time to really do the internal work of who am I, what am I looking for in this candidate? Why am I looking for that? Is that the right thing to be looking for? And then what are the other search committees? So thinking about what those biases are. And then this, I'm sure you've seen, but that the equality is not equity, that the reality is there, if you were to have, and I don't want to say blind reading, because I find that to be ableist as well. We also have to think about the types of terminology we're using. But I'm saying if we're trying to remove and anonymize these resumes, that is not, to me, that's not equitable, because it's assuming that everybody had the same chances. So when we talk about technical debt, where we haven't invested in our technology and now we're behind, but there's education debt, and not in the sense of owing money to the banks for your education. It's about the diverse candidates and the diverse students have not had all of those privileged access to the internships with their uncles, the education or the free summers to go and do that camp or that job. So looking at a resume just like that, of course, once again, it privileges those that have had those opportunities. So that's why I think it's important to look at that person, get to know that person, and then learn their story and what the potential is. This is a model that I've used at UCSF because we have so many simultaneous initiatives happening in DEI/AR. So diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and anti-racism. And really, they follow a similar developmental model, which is that we need to start with ourselves. We need to clean up our own house, do all of that first. And then once we are centered and we've done the work, then we can look at one other person and get to know that person. And then we can start putting in our collective vision for the university, for the future of hiring practices. But we really need to center ourselves, center our teams, and then look forward. So in terms of how we can get around this, I think the idea that technology is not neutral, we need to really think about the processes from a really critical perspective and take that academic perspective, research perspective, just lay it out, say what's working, what's not, how can we improve it, and not worry about what's often common in more of the admin and finance of like hierarchical thinking. Think about the ideas. There's no, we're just going to kick it around. Nobody's going to be in trouble for having done something. Also, one thing that is important to think about is this is my last piece, is the job language. I'm originally a linguist, and so I think about language a lot. And just by changing the names of the titles, I have attracted really diverse pools. So, for example, I could have called this a business analyst 4, but instead it's a digital equity education analyst, which is a mouthful. And sorry, Rebecca, you have to say it all the time, but it's exciting. And we were able to hire some, actually, I ended up opening a second position because we had 2 amazing candidates. And so the idea of like digital equity, I want to be part of that. And then equitable, and then with a focus on equitable access, the position leads and works with diverse cross-functional teams, like put it out there and say works with. So then Brian's user experience designer 3 is the whatever, but you just put the word inclusive in front of it and you get a whole new group of candidates. And so think about those words, think about gender as well, collaborates with, works with instead of leads, and then also reduce the requirements to be preferred, not required. And that will really open some doors. So Remy. I think we're done. 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
We will stay here after.
Yeah.
And we can carry on.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any 2-minute questions? Are you awake yet, Armando? Oh, Maggie.beers@ucsf.edu. Yeah.
The biggest problem was that you were trying to solve when you all started this effort. What really, I mean, because you've mentioned 4 or 5 different things, and I'm curious when you all started, what led, was it, we need to hire a whole bunch of people fast? Was it, we know there are some problems in our process?
Yes.
Yeah.
The teams local to my group and my manager at the time had 4 hires that we needed to hire at extreme speed. And so I started to build automation to help just the hiring mechanism, and then realized that starting to build that out, there are all of these gaps that I somehow assumed, and this is like one of my biggest cognitive biases, that like the institution's got a solution for, like, somebody is thinking about that, and realized that like we're not asking lived names, we're not asking like pronoun, like we're not asking the basic stuff that we are already supposed to be like institutionally cognitive of. And so like again, for me, I build processes, but I love that, like, for me, building the processes is the meta process to get to the point of, okay, let's actually think about how we address this, because like now I'm ready to do that. And like, I'm not trying to center myself, but like, this has been really illuminating for me, even just this talk. This is what I needed. This is the work I need to do. But I think I needed to go through this object to think with process to get to that point. So that's a number of levels. That's the answer. Glenda, last one.
So you have all these processes that are going into place. We've got this looming thing out here called AI. What's going to happen when that starts getting involved with the hiring process?
Remember when people were really worried about, I don't know, fill in the blank. I guess, I think, okay, I just had a vision going back to like the first camera, a film camera, where we had the theater. And so we knew how to do the theater. And then with the movie camera came out. And so they started filming plays. And then they finally realized, but actually we can film a train coming at us and we can do all these other things. And so I think every time we have a new technology, we need to examine our schemas. What is it we're trying to do, and do things differently? And this AI kind of points out the fallacy of putting out a posting and hoping that the perfect candidates come, like fishing or something. And we cannot, that's not what I've done with Brian. Like Brian came to me at State, recommended through through journalism. He's a journalist and now he's doing AI, not AI, well, you will, but he's doing he started out doing communications, and I'm like, okay, that's not a big jump, and he's amazing, and I know that we can work with him. And then I said, well, in a year, Brian, I'm going to have a a user experience job available. So he went and got all the certifications and did that training. And so the idea is that that's the other assumption, is that if we make the perfect system or job description, will attract those diverse people, but we need to mentor from within. We need to build those people. And so AI is just sort of like a noise, really. It's about what is it, who are the people, what are those human skills that AI will never replace? What is it that you need? And so we're focusing on the people instead of the terms, the terminology and stuff. So, yeah. Yep, all done. And we're done.
I'm wondering if I can ask you.
Question, sorry.
Sure.
So I've been trying to help as much as I can. Thank you, Sharon, for helping here and our AV tech person. But I've been hearing a lot about, let's really work, let's really go to where the issues are, and let's really examine them. So, and I hear you mentioning, saying that, we should be asking this type of questions, for instance, gender or not gender and so on, right? Or what is it, the pronouns?
Mm-hmm.
Yet for me, the question is, how deep do we want to go? Because pronouns are, for the way I see it, and I'm native, I'm from the Mexica Tenochca Nation.
Mm-hmm.
In our languages and a lot of native languages, there's no gender.
Mm-hmm.
Gender is a European construct. I guess you know that pretty well. So that's, if we put if we put pronouns, the way I see it, the way we see it, is that just a band-aid to white supremacy.
Yeah.
Right. So white supremacy is that's the sickness. It's like the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just putting a band-aid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I understand that it feels good for a lot of relatives to not being called, the typical gender, right? But that's just a band-aid. So how deep do we want to go? Because to the extent that we keep on adding band-aids,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to address the issue, right? And technology is created, as you mentioned, by white people, white guys, cisgender, and so on. So and we examine the technology. Yeah, we can examine it, but I think we should go even further deep and say, okay, who are these guys? Why are they doing that? Or even deeper. So I don't know if there's any conversations about that. No, thank you.
I would say that we need to do more storytelling in our presenting of ourselves as professionals and personal and family people, and also asking for those stories when we're recruiting candidates, and look at a more holistic approach to analyzing the competencies and the fit. I know that in education, we use e-portfolios quite a bit, and that's the personal story and how they've, and so we were talking yesterday about hiring, that you're not really hiring only just that person, you're hiring their family, you're hiring their, the whole story. So I think to get to that, it's avoiding the fact that this person will be excluded because they chose not to include pronouns, because that doesn't mean anything to them. So taking away those barriers that might have excluded, and having more of a holistic, open-ended consideration of these candidates. It may take more time or not, but I like what you're saying though about how deep do we go in terms, but I think people are so dynamic and complex, and we can't reduce them to keywords, so I don't know. We'll have to kick that, please.
So first, I want to acknowledge, thank you. I just learned a couple of things by what you just said there. So thank you for sharing that part about the pronouns, because that was new to me. So I consider myself a West Indian, grew up in the Caribbean. So I have a little bit of a different cultural background coming to the US. But I also think that one of my mentors years ago told me, when it came to technology, he said, think of technology as the great amplifier. So whatever it is that you have, whatever it is you do, technology has the ability to amplify that by orders of magnitude. So with the question with AI, or the question of the tools and the processes, what we are doing is we are amplifying what we already do. So Maggie, to your point, when you're saying we need to look at ourselves and who we are and how do we approach these conversations, talk to people, these stories, hiring. If we do the work internally, then hopefully our technology will amplify the good work that we've done. But we need to focus on the root, which is our internal processes. I've worked with Remy for a long time, and we have this thing where when we go through these processes, I go to him and I'm like, hey, I need you to check me on this if I'm not looking at this properly. And he's done the same thing with me. He's like, I need you to check because we have different perspectives. We know we have internal biases, and we know that we have these blind spots. So how do we address it? Specific to your question with the pronouns and the technology, I like the idea of allowing options for people to choose what it is they want to identify and how they want to describe themselves in order to accommodate as large a group of people as possible, and then inviting that culture into our environment. So when I hire someone, I'm not hiring just a person with skills. I'm bringing in a culture, a perspective, an idea that hopefully is different than mine, that adds to my environment. And what that means is there will be friction, there will be disagreements, and there will be things that we don't see eye to eye on that we may not understand. But if I value that person, I will listen and respect their perspective and allow them a seat at the table, because that is what has been denied a lot. At least I've been through that experience as well. So I do not want to replicate that to someone else. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is something that it was good for me to hear also.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think the conversation could continue, but thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. And please fill in the survey. So we want to hear from you. Thank you.